Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 12 of my Logic Pro 10 201 course. This is the third and final video on arrangement building before we record the vocals, so I want this track as close to a final arrangement as possible before we do that. So in this video, I have some additional arrangement changes to make. I'm going to build out the intro, play around with region automation, and also create some white noise sweeping effects to help with the transitions. So the first thing I did was I kind of expanded on the little melodic motif that's in the big beat section. It used to sound like this. I'll just solo that out. So there's that little da na 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 na, that sort of like ostinato motif that repeats and repeats. I just feel like it got a bit monotonous, so I changed it up to this, and all I did is I took that same idea and just moved a few notes around in some spots. It's mostly the same. I might have changed, I don't know, 10 notes overall. But remember, the synth lead that we added also has that same melody, so I had to make sure that the little melodic motif between these two regions was the same, even though one of them has some chords in the bottom and the other one is just a monophonic lead. Now, I'm going to keep the original idea in the first verse, because the singing is kind of lower and there's a more subdued texture and instrumentation there. I don't want these high notes jumping around all over the place. I don't want them to be too noticeable, so that I'm not putting the new idea in the first verse. However, for the second verse and the outro, I will be. So I'm just going to copy all of these over. Just hold Option and duplicate those over. Command R. Copy these over. And Command R one more time. So let's just give that a listen. I'll keep the vocals out for now. Another thing I had mentioned wanting to do in the choruses was add some sort of like a mid-high range chord, either some strings or some brass or something, because although I like the impact of this beat, and I like the fact that it slows the tempo down, the tempo still stays at 128, but it slows the groove and the feel down a bit, I want something else in here to fill in the chords a bit better. Because before it was the synth layer supplying those chords, but now the synth layer is sort of like a pulsing movement. You know, the arpeggiator and the tremolo and everything that's in there. That's more or less giving it motion. So let's create something that I'm gonna try to sort of mimic that distorted bass that I created. So to me, that sounds like synthetic distorted brass from like an orchestra. I'm going to try to do the same thing and create something that kind of sounds like synthetic distorted strings and choir maybe. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a new instrument track first. And then I'm just going to pull all of these chords from the synth layer up to that track. And I'm just going to call this Synth Orchestra. I'm going to put it next to the ES2 instrument, though. Let's just loop all of this. And then I'm going to add Alchemy to it. And in Alchemy, I'm going to, again, sort of going with this idea of like a retro 80s synthwave sound. I'm going to search up 80s brass. Let's see if there's anything like that. So we have 80s pop synth brass. Let's give that a listen. It's probably going to sound pretty cheesy by itself, but we will fix that. Yeah, it reminds me of one of the PBS educational videos we used to watch in grade school when I was a kid. So one of the really cool things about Alchemy is there's this sort of 8-pad modulation pad down here. Each one of these is called a snapshot. So there's 8 snapshots, and each one has different modulation and different character to it. So not only can you click on them, you can also move this around and gradually modulate things. I'm going to go with this res sweep one. It's a resonance sweep option. I'm going to go up to the advanced controls, and let's control the amount of that resonance sweep. Notice that the cutoff knob appears moving quite heavily for each note, so I'm going to click on that, and you'll see that there's an envelope assigned to that cutoff frequency. So when you pull your resonance up really high, it creates like a feedback boost, and then if you do a cutoff sweep, it'll create that really bright sweeping sound. So one thing we can do is we can adjust the amount of this here. It looks a little weird because it looks like it's barely up, but the range of the modulation is much higher than the bottom of the knob. So we could actually probably pull this down to like 0%, and we'll still get modulation on it. Yeah, and even in the negative, we're still getting a bit of that sweep. I just don't want so much of the sweep in there. Now, like with the synth brass thing we created earlier, I don't want these notes to carry on forever. So what I'm going to do is drag over all these, hit J to just join them together, double click to open in piano roll, and I'm going to make each one of these notes 1/4 note in length. There's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do manual editing. You can, the way I prefer doing it is with the Midi Transform window. So I'm just going to select all the notes, go to Functions, Midi Transform, and then go down to Fixed Note Length. And the only thing that's really tricky about using the Midi Transform window is understanding what these values mean. So the first value is bars, the second one is beats, the third one is divisions, and the last one is ticks. Now, a tick is 1/960th of a beat, but if you have your grid split into different divisions like 16th notes, your ticks are only going to go up to that deviation of a quarter note. So if you're using 16th notes, you're splitting each quarter note into 4 16th notes. So really your tick values will only go up to 240 before they reset themselves. But if you notice that the division values go up until 3, and then 4 starts a new beat. So we don't really need to use anything and like any complicated rhythms here. You just have to know what those mean. So it's bar, beat, division, tick. So if I double click, I want 0 bars in length, 1 beat in length, 0 divisions, and 0 ticks. And I'm putting a space between each one of those. So 0 bars, 1 beat, 0 divisions, 0 ticks. Hit operate, and all of the notes will be exactly 1 beat in length. If you wanted them a little longer than a beat, you could pull up the tick amount and hit operate, and it'd add a little bit of extra length to each one. I'm gonna hit undo and go back. And let's see what this sounds like. It's probably gonna be really short, so we're gonna have to do some more stuff in Alchemy to make this sound right. Yeah, I want the tail end of the notes to sort of drag out a little longer. So what I'm gonna do is go to my volume envelope. So you just click on the volume knob. This is the volume envelope right here. You can pull up the attack time if you want it to kind of be slower. So I don't want it to be so forward, but I also want the note to sort of last a little longer. So I'm going to pull up the decay time. Pulling out the release isn't really going to do anything if our sustain is going all the way down to 0. If you want the notes to intentionally last longer, you could also pull out the hold. So that's a cool thing with the envelopes in Alchemy. They're not just ADSRs, they're AHDSRs. Although the notes aren't long enough to matter on the hold stage, so. So I'm going to treat this similarly to how I treated the ES2 synth brass bass. I'm going to add the bit crusher to this for some distortion. One thing I'm going to do is turn off that acoustic reverb here in Alchemy. We're going to add different reverb to it. Maybe a little less drive. And I'm going to add some EQ after this, though, because I don't want that much high end in it. And then what I'll do is I will add the same Space Designer reverb that I did for the ES2 instrument. But I'm going to go crazy with this and pull the dry signal all the way down. So it almost sounds like distorted, distant synth brass strings, and maybe even a little bit of vocals because of the yaw sound produced by the bit crusher. So let's see what all of these sound like together. Yeah, when I mute it, you can really tell it's not there. So it's just filling in some of those mid frequencies. So let me just duplicate this over to the other chorus and we can move on. Okay, so next let's talk about creating an intro. And I don't mean just this intro that I slapped on here. That's just a copy of the second verse. Let's do something that sort of starts off really soft and fades in and transitions into this main beat here. So I'm going to use the more subdued idea in the first verse to sort of build into the big beat and then have the big beat transition down into the first verse. So it's like a building of texture and then an intensity and then sort of dying down into a softer intensity. So you'll notice that I don't really have any room at the beginning of the song to add any more measures. So there's a real quick and easy way to do this in Logic. If you just select the area that you want to copy and insert with the locators up here with the cycle range, and you go up to Edit, Cut Insert Time, and you choose Copy Section Between Locators. It'll copy that. Then you can go back to the beginning here, put the playhead where you want to insert those measures, and you can paste them in. One thing I'm going to do real quick, though, is I'm going to trim up this marker because I don't want to split the marker in half. And then I'll just go up to Edit, Cut Insert Time, and Insert Section at Playhead. And there we go. So we've got the verse 1, intro, verse 1, chorus. Except our intro is not going to be called intro anymore. This is just going to be called instrumental beat. And this will be called the intro. So that's going to be the true intro. Let me just change the color of the marker. If you didn't know that, you can open up your marker or open up your color palette, select a marker, and choose a color for it as well. I find that it helps make them pop off of the time ruler up here a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to delete the scratch vocals off of that because there's not going to be any lyrics on this at all. And the first thing I want to do is I want to play around with the beat down here. I want to do something a little bit different. I wasn't really happy with the back end fill here, but another thing I want to do is, at least on this very first one, I want to get rid of this sub kick and tight kick. Those were there just to reinforce the first beat. I'll probably keep those there in the first verse, but for the intro, it's not going to be there. And then as we go toward the tail end here, toward the fill, I'm going to keep the tight kick on just quarter notes. And I'm going to add the snare drum to this. And actually, this note's going to go away, because it's going to be like 1, 2, 3, silence, and then da-da-boom. And it's going to go right into the instrumental beat. So this is going to go away. So it'll be something more like this. Let me add the snare in here as well. And this little break here is going to be silence, so we'll add that in just a moment. I want to add in my snare here, but I don't want the snare to be in as long as, say, the claps are. So I'm going to make the snare fade in with velocity separately, independently of the clap. And one thing I didn't show you when I added the clap in and I created that crescendo in the clap, I ended up using the transform tool. One thing you can do is you can click here to open up your, what used to be called the Midi Draw. Now it's just called the region automation or Midi automation. And you can change this to region and then change this to note velocity. Here we go. And I didn't realize you could do this because in previous versions of Logic, if you drew in a line here, it would make all of the notes conform to that velocity. But apparently they fixed this in Logic 10.4. You can drag over these notes, and just the selected notes will conform to that velocity ramp. So that's pretty cool. So I'm also going to do some different things, some different rhythms with the snare as well. Let's just shorten these notes up a bit. There we go. I'm going to go to 8th notes at first, and then go to 16th notes. So I'm just holding Option and duplicating these. And then I'm going to go to 24th notes, which are 16th note triplets. And I'm going to add in a note here, here, and here. And I'm going to do the same right here as well. This is going to create a bit of like a, almost like a roll on that snare drum. So let's give that a listen. And on those last two drum hits, I'm going to add the clap in, and I'm also going to add in the impact snare. But I'm going to take out the hard kick. And you know, one thing I've been meaning to do for a while is shorten up that impact snare. It's just still a bit too long for my taste. So let's pull the decay down. There we go. So if it sounds too short now, it's fine. We're going to be adding some nice gated reverb to it, so it'll fill the space a bit better. It's just I don't like that long decay time on it. It's just taking too long to decay. Okay, so this video is already 18 minutes long. I don't want it to be a 3-hour long video. So off screen, I went through and I added some basic transitions between the sections, and I also built out my intro. So here's the intro that I have right now. Okay, so the piano is identical. I didn't do anything to the piano except I muted a few of the clips at the first half of the intro. The very last reversed piano chord, I bumped it up by 5 dB in the region inspector just because I want that reverse piano, like once everything pauses, I want that reverse piano to really be audible and fade into the instrumental part. For the synth, this was the normal synth up here. Basically what I did was I took the synth lead and then I took the bass line and I mixed them together in a new region, and I deleted any chord notes. So it's literally just the bass line up an octave with the main motive, that ostinato motive going on. And I changed the instrument. I changed this to sculpture. And I used a preset called Gatekeeper, and then I pulled the material from steel down to nylon, which gives it a softer tone. And one thing you'll notice is that I took out the kick drum sidechain compression source because none of these instruments have sidechain compression on them. So if I forget to mention it, I turned off the compressor on all of these. And a lot of these I created a new track just for them. Like the new verse synth for the intro is a brand new track. The bass is a brand new track as well. I basically took the bass from the verse, duplicated that bass, turned the arpeggio, actually I changed the arpeggio. I changed the arpeggio to an eighth note, pulled the octave range down to 1, and pulled the note length down under options here. And so really all it is it's just a repeating eighth note pattern. And of course the compressor is turned off because I'm not using any sidechain compression. And really everything else is automation. So let's hit A to pull up automation. And when I draw in sort of creative automation, I like to stick with region automation, not track automation. I rarely do I touch the track automation until I'm ready to jump into mixing. So the first thing I did was at the very end here on the verse synth, the piano, and the bass, I ducked down the automation to 0. I wanted like a hard off on these. Even though there's still MIDI data there, I want any sort of resonant sound whatsoever to be ducked out with the volume meter, or volume fader rather. So if I mute that reversed piano, that's what it sounds like. And the way you can do that, if you don't know already, is you can use your marquee tool and you can drag over an area and just pull straight down. So I did that for all 3 of the synths, the synth, the piano, and the bass. I did not do it to the drums. I just took out the notes there as I showed you earlier. For additional automation, for the bass, you can see that I just automated the volume up, starting real low at -11, going all the way up to -3, and then dropping to 0. But I also automated the high cut frequency of the EQ. So if you don't know how to do this, I'll show you real quick. You can choose your automation parameter here, go to any of the plugins that are on the channel. So I went to channel EQ and high cut frequency. And then what this allows you to do is it allows you to automate that parameter in the EQ. So all you have to do is just use your mouse tool or your pointer tool just to draw in the automation. So if I want to start a little higher, I can do that. And you'll see that high cut frequency move in the EQ plugin. I ended up going all the way down because I wanted it to start almost with just sub, but with almost nothing there. So the mid-range and the high end and the bass slowly builds in. It's not so abrupt. I did the same thing for the drums as well. I automated the volume going up to -2, and then I automated the high cut frequency here as well, going all the way down to 20, so that when you start, it doesn't even sound like there's a kick drum there. And then just slowly it fades in over time. So it starts as like a low rumble. And by the time you're 3/4 of the way in, you've got the full frequency range. And I did the same thing up here to the Sculpture synth as well. Although I had a high cut going on at 2400 hertz the whole time, I only started around 620, because if you go any lower, you just won't hear it at all. So really, when you start the playback, the first instrument you hear is this first verse synth, because everything else has been cut out. And then slowly the other instruments come in. So a couple other transitional things I did was I created a new audio track down here, and I dragged in the impact snare sample by itself with the full tail on it, and I'm using it kind of like almost like a cymbal crash at the beginning of some of the more hard-hitting sections. And then I'm also using it here. I'm going to pull this up to the top so we can see it. I'm also using it here at the beginning of the chorus, and then I used it in reverse by clicking the reverse button over here in the region inspector just before the chorus, transitioning from the first verse into the first chorus. Now, notice there's a gap here as well. Instead of using automation to duck these down, I actually just cut them out with the marquee tool and just hit delete. The only thing that's not deleted there is, again, the drums. But the drums here, I took out that little 16th note fill that was in the intro. It's just complete silence. And in between the first chorus and the second verse, there's no gap at all. So I just line those up back to back. And the same goes for the second verse to second chorus and the second chorus to the outro. So I want to show you one more really cool thing with white noise that you can do to build and release tension. So what I'm going to do is create a new software instrument. I'll pull it up here just for demonstration. And I'm going to call this White Noise Sweeps. I'm going to pull the volume all the way down on this track because otherwise the noise generator is just going to be, full volume blaring. So go to Instruments, go down to Utility, and go to Test Oscillator. So the Test Oscillator can create different test tones. So you can do a sine wave, white noise, pink noise, square wave, needle pulse. You go with the white noise. And this is why I pulled the volume down. Unlike other instruments, it's not triggered by MIDI notes. It's just on. So you have to automate this with volume or turn it off or bypass it or whatever. So what I'm going to do is create a few white noise sweeps, but I'm not going to do it with volume. I'm going to do it with EQ, kind of like I did with these other instruments. So instead of adding channel EQ, there's no point in having all those different bands. I'm just going to use the single band EQ. And with the single band EQ, I'm going to scoop out the high end. So use the high cut, pull the frequency all the way down to 20 hertz, and we shouldn't hear anything. There's probably a bit of a low rumble down there below 20 hertz, but most speakers don't go down that low anyway. So what I'm going to do is automate this frequency. So I'll hit A to pull up my automation. I am going to use track automation for this. I'll go to single EQ frequency. So with my automation snap turned on, I'm going to click here and click somewhere over here and pull this up. So that's pretty annoying to listen to, so I'm just going to mute the white noise sweep for now. And then over here, I'm going to come down. It's almost going to be like a cymbal crash. I'll pull this all the way down. And then here, I'm going to drag over this with the marquee tool and pull it all the way down as well. So I can independently control the volume of the track, but the sweep is happening with this single band EQ here. So we're not done yet. That little pop that happens from dropping the automation all the way down, we're actually going to use that to our advantage. So I'm going to grab the reverb that I put on the synth orchestra over here. Just going to copy that over. And let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, it's going to give us a bit of an explosive tone, but I don't want the dry signal all the way down at 0. I'll pull this up a bit. And that explosive part is a little out of control volume-wise. So what I'm going to do is bring in my volume automation here. and pull down the volume at that point quite a bit. And let's see if we can manage to control that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this slope down. I'm going to render that as a separate sample file. This will just be like a fade in plus explosion. I'll pull that back a little further. And I'll pull down the volume for it continually after the drop there. So let's render this as its own sound effect. The only thing that's weird is that there's no MIDI notes, so there's no region to bounce. You could create a empty MIDI region and then bounce that area, but what I'm going to do is just print this to another audio track. So the way you can do that is just choose a send here. I'm going to go bus 2, set the send to 100%. I'm going to create a new empty audio track, so Option Command N, choose audio. I'll just call this white noise, sweeps, and I'm going to make the input of this audio track the same as the output of that bus. So this will be bus 2. Make sure that it's stereo. I'm going to mute it, but arm it for recording, and then just start it back here and hit record. And there you go. It's just kind of trial and error. So I've got a cool explosive sound effect there. Let's create another one that's just a sweep down rather than a sweep up. Okay, so now I can get rid of this white noise track completely and just use the samples. So off screen, I plugged in all those different white noise samples in various places to accent rising and release. So let me just play the very first one, and then at the end of the video, I'll play back the entire track for you. Cool, and there's still some adjustments I'll need to make in mixing, but that's a good start. So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As I said, I'll leave you with a playthrough of the track so far, and in the next video, we'll start talking about vocal recording techniques and moving on to vocal production. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching. It's a broken world alone. We got kids with no shelter, lies from our leaders, pain from the sky to the sea. Death with no freedom, hearts with no heroes.